Welcome to Sunshine and Moonbeam, episode 3. How did you guys like the music? That was courtesy of Jed over there. He is the tech master behind this entire show, despite me being Asian, obviously. No! Hold on. I forgot to mute the other side. Well, anyways, welcome to Sunshine and Moonbeam, episode 3, Journey to Crystal Brush 2014, where we actually try to teach Jed and the audience, obviously, little things here and there about the hobby itself, starting, from scratch, where to get in miniatures. That was episode 1, and then last episode was about assembling models, including the tools and everything else. And this episode is actually about basing itself. But before we start, obviously, I'm Mars, Voices of Mars, and my co-host here is
Mystics.
And our honorary guest on the other side is...
Hey, I'm David. I have a small paint studio called Twin Link Paints.
So Dave, tell us about yourself, your experience with the hobby and everything else.
Well, I started back in, I think, 2007, just dabbling. I used to build models as a kid, so it was an easy entry into the hobby. Started in my college dorm room, just assembling models in the corner, kind of keeping it a secret from all the roommates and everything like that. But once I, got out of college and actually had a job and funds in order to fund the expensive hobby, I was able to expand and start up a paint desk and everything like that. And started the 40K. Played that for several years. Dabbled a little bit in fantasy, not so much. But I am now getting into Malifaux, and hope to stay with it once the new edition drops.
Yeah, perfect timing because the new edition just came in. Well, I actually forgot to thank a couple of shout-outs before we started. Obviously, thank you to our previous guests, Oasis Rising and Max Payne. I believe Max Payne is watching us right now. Also, thank you for Clayton, who made our logos and all the ponies. So thank you, Clayton Tait. His DeviantArt link will be on the bottom. I don't know if he takes commission on digital paintings, but you should try to contact him because he is an awesome digital artist.
Yes.
Anyway, hello to you guys who are watching this right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, we do have a chat set up live. It is a lot better than the YouTube comment. If you can go to mysticspaintingantics.blogspot.com. Mystics is spelled MYST1X. paintingantics.blogspot.com. Click on the live tab and you'll see a chat box on the bottom. Don't worry, that is not a spam. Set your own nickname, and then we got a couple of people there actually. We have Karsten, Tighthead Prop, Michael Moggy, Max Payne, Demon Jester J, and Courage and Honor at the moment. So welcome, guys, and hopefully you guys won't criticize this show too much. But anyway, let's get the show started. Basing. When we talk about basing, Dave, what do you think about basing itself?
Well, other than a stand to stand up your infantry or character figures on, it's kind of an art form in itself. You have your miniature by himself, and he's the subject of the work. But you need, I guess, an environment or a backdrop or somewhere to put him, because you're trying to tell a story, so to speak, of whether it's a gaming miniature or it's a competition display piece. You want your viewer or audience or what have you to kind of get a feel of the story you're trying to tell. The miniature itself, has a pose, it has a paint job, but where is he sitting? where is he? I mean, I think basing helps tell the other half of the story, if that makes sense.
I completely agree to that. I like the fact that you put it as basing itself. It's another art form, because the way I see it, sometimes people can actually spend more time on the basing than the actual miniature itself, because converting, you kind of already have a base on the miniatures, but basing basically start off as a blank canvas and you build it up. But in a way, you want to make it so it doesn't stand out too much that it will take over your miniatures, especially in the judging process, which why the show is started, because Jed wanted to go into Crystal Brush. It's like the realm of, I don't know, I wouldn't say the gods, but it's a really tough competition. And it has gone a long way. So Cool Mini or Not has created this competition where one of the biggest, I believe it is the biggest price, is $10,000, and it's
$10.
$10. This is not a
Goodbye.
GW show, you know.
Yes.
So they're doing this for reals. So basing itself is an art form. What do you think of that, Jed?
To me, for basing, that's one of the things that I know at first I'm going to struggle with, because I haven't developed that sense of how much basing is too much yet. So that's going to be I think one of the tougher things for me to actually get a good grip of as I go along this little trip.
Yep, yeah. Like, how much is too much? That is exactly the question. That some people might argue that it could be, oh, I spend 10 hours on the basing and 50 hours on the miniatures. And some people already think 60 hours on a whole display set. Trust me, 60 hours is nothing. And for my particular experience, the Lollipop Girls that I entered, the Crystal Brush, I spent about 20 hours on the basing itself and about 10 hours on the models. So that's overkill for me, because I shouldn't have spent that much time on the base but concentrate on the miniatures. But how important is it to actually base your models, Dave?
Well, if you think of, going off what I said, of placing the miniature in a environment, if you think of the base, if you think of the whole piece as, let's say, a stage, or you're setting up a, think of it as theater. You have your character, and then in theater you usually want a set, because a character sitting out there on a blank stage, you really got to pay attention to that figure, and that figure's got to be, very, very good in order to keep your attention. Once you put it on a base that's, not blank, it grabs your attention, because you're able to see, oh, well, this figure is in this environment. This guy is on this snowy hilltop. He's got ice all over him. It's just a seamless blend of, how the figure's painted and how the base is, set up. Blank bases can help your figure pop if that's really what you want to go for, but I think in the competition world, you do want that stage design there. And I know that some competitions actually disqualify you if you have blank bases. So it's just a little bit of extra work. It's composition. It's what's the word I'm thinking of?
Well, right now you brought up two good topics. One of them is blank bases, and the other one is composition. Composition is actually going to be our next episode. So I have this whole syllabus set up for Jed over here to actually learn the basics, from where to get your miniatures all the way to actually highlighting it, and we're doing it every week. So that's next week with Anima Warforge. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing your channel again. I'm going to call you AWF, Trent. But another topic that you mentioned was blank bases. What is considered as blank bases? Obviously, the black, round, or square, whichever kind of base that you use, unpainted, untouched, is blank. But there's some argument where sometimes people just put sand, don't paint it, or put dirt and not paint it, and then like a tree bark, and then they don't do anything to it, and then they call that a complete base already. What do you think of that, Dave?
I think if you're going with just sand or dirt or just a single material, just to throw something on top of that base in order to call it non-blank, I think that kind of qualifies it as a gaming miniature. But it also shows that you didn't want to take the extra effort to enhance your piece. You're like I know sometimes it's a matter of time. You get down to the wire trying to meet the deadline, and he's got to do something with his base, sand. But I think it shows a void of planning, or you didn't really have an idea before you started the miniature, or you just picked up one of your gaming pieces and said, I should put this in the competition. I don't know. I think single flock or sand, or it's okay, but I mean it's great if blank bases on a tabletop. That bothers me too, but it's fine as long as you're just doing it for gaming purposes, I guess.
It's something that might work for tabletop,
mm-hmm.
or something that might work for local gaming competition, but in the standard of Crystal Brush, obviously, it's something that it's not something that's frowned upon. But if you enter something with just a simple base, people will think, "Are you sure you really want to be in this competition?" Because it's for me, I think, like you said earlier, basing itself it's an art form where you're not limited to only creating that particular snapshot of your miniature on where he or she is at, but it's also a chance for you to actually experiment on certain things to create an environment that usually not in real life. Like, for example, my lollipop girls, they're made out of just random materials that I found at Michael's, and then I was trying to make like some kind of lollipop looking stages because they are the showgirls of Malifaux. What do you think of the whole like blank base in particular, Jed? Like what do you have opinion on? Because you obviously haven't really played on a tabletop, and you haven't really started on actually competition painting. Where do you want to go with this?
Well, one thing is a question I actually have that goes into this is how I know that I'm going to need to design and make bases that are display quality. But my question is, how easy is it to go from a base that complements your model to a base that competes with your model instead?
That's a good question.
It's a good question that wasn't in the dry run.
That's okay. Well, I mean, you have to think of what you want to be the centerpiece. Are you entering in a base, or are you entering a painted model? I think you'll know as you're, putting the finished model on the finished base or the near complete base, whether or not it's detracting from the painted piece. If you have a base that has so much going on, let's say, Rebel Ruins or something, you have a figure crouched out in the back, and you have all this urban wasteland, pillars and I-beams and all this rusted stuff. And when somebody besides yourself, because you know what you're looking for the guy in the back, but to someone who has never seen it before, where's their eye going to go? Are they looking at the figure you painted and that's what you entered, or are they looking at the this spectacular base that you worked on? Are they staring at the wasteland that you created, or are they staring at the little guardsman who's bleeding in the back? It's just, you don't want to spend so much time on getting somebody to look elsewhere besides your figure. You still want that to be the centerpiece. You want the spotlight on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I think a couple of other techniques can actually make your miniature the standout point, like OSL for example. If you have everything like kind of mushy, dark, I mean a gray color is all toned down, and suddenly in there's an OSL and the face, and it glows orange out of like gray is usually more cool colors, bluish, and then suddenly you have an orange in the face that usually pops everything out. Isabel actually bringing up a good comment over there. You know, for a Kadashan jungle warrior, you painted him really beautifully with all the jungle camo and everything else, and then he's sanding on some like piece of sand. That the camo isn't gonna work, obviously. And then that is the good point that we wanted to bring out. Like a good base can really bring the miniature together. That's what Isabel said. That is the actual point of creating a base, is to complement your miniature and bring it all together instead of just trying to outdo each other, which is I do see some people do that.
Yeah. What I like from what her comment was saying, that gives me an idea that no matter if you're what you're painting is if you're painting something to a certain theme, the base itself should also match that theme, so it looks like it belongs in that environment.
Yes. Yes.
Like not painting a jungle character in the middle of the Arctic tundra, for instance.
Yes, because you're gonna stick out.
Yes.
And this also bring out a good example from 2012 Crystal Brush winner. I don't know if you guys have seen it. This is where the basing and the model itself becomes a blurred line, where it's like a huge sphere, and then there's a figure in the center where in the middle of her belly there's another sphere. So there is some kind of theme. It's all kind of look like a magical elf, wood elf kind of thing, but there is a whole theme. But that whole entire model is about this big. So it's something that you have to learn over time, I believe.
It's easy to bleed this conversation over into composition.
Yes, it's very easy. So
we'll try not to save, the next episode.
Yeah, because we have another episode next time.
Sorry, Troy.
So,
actually,
now,
Isabel. Sorry, go ahead, Mario.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, yeah, Isabel has another good comment here. She says that when doing a competition base, she always suggests having 2 or 3 bases as options, all different. That goes back to also being more of a composition thing as well.
Yeah, well, we talked about this on the dry run yesterday about actually pinning your model onto the base, which brings out to our next topic, Dave, whether you actually glue everything in onto the base and then prime them, or you actually do them separately.
For gaming miniatures, if the model's not too complex, I usually affix the miniature onto the base, prime it all together, stick that on some sort of handhold, and then go to town painting it. If it's going to be a display base or a miniature that I want to paint, to the teeth, or to the nines, I should say, I usually leave it separate and then pin it later. It's probably a good idea if you're going for a competition piece to do them separately. That way you can focus on painting the miniature and then painting the base. But it's also a good idea to go ahead and pin the feet in a way that you can remove the miniature from wherever you're painting it on and actually stick it into the base at different points in time, so you can see that if there's, source lighting, is it matching up, or is there some sort of composition that you're going for? Are the lines of sight okay? Do you need to place him somewhere else in the piece? That sort of thing.
Let's say if you botch either one of those, you can also redo the base or redo the miniature separately, because stripping miniature with the base on is obviously really hard.
Right.
Do we have any questions from the audience so far before we actually move into basing materials, or from Jed in this case?
No questions for me right now. My questions got answered.
Anyone from the audience? How many audience do we have actually?
We have 8 viewers today.
Woohoo! Yes, yeah. I guess everybody else in the WGC community knows how to base their stuff. Well, anyway, let's continue on. This is actually where we go into A little bit more details on the basing materials. You would not believe how long we can talk about sand. This was done in the dryland yesterday. We're actually going to go through the basing materials. If you have to kind of separate them into groups, I would say there's about 5 groups that we want to group them. The first one being the natural basing materials that you can find. That's like sand, tree bark, tiny leaves, dirt, little rocks, pebbles, whatever you can find. The most basic, with my humble opinion, I say that the most basic basing thing that you can do to your miniature is probably sand. What do you think of that, Dave?
Yeah, that's the ubiquitous basing material. Sand or ballast or pebbles. It can be found virtually anywhere. You can use natural, synthetic, store purchased. You can go outside to your garden, grab some soil. It's a very fine basing material.
One thing you shouldn't do is actually buy sand from GW. Because
you're paying a premium.
$8 for a small box.
They do have a blend that they like, and it's targeted towards people who haven't done it before. That's their target audience, their target buyer. It's a one-stop sort of deal. But yes, you can go to Home Depot, buy $2 bag of play sand, or I bought a bag of fireplace. I forget what it was called, ballast, I want to say, but it was multiple size flock. I mean, it was perfect for what I wanted to do. And it was very cheap.
If you're cheaper, like me, I usually go to the park where they have a sandbox. Just grab a handful, put it in a jar, and take it home.
There's nothing wrong with going out and taking things from nature. Roman Jarhead from Massive Voodoo does that all the time. He says he goes out and stuffs his pockets full of stuff that he wants to base with, and just goes to different parts of the country, out in the wilderness, finds great things that are interesting, and then uses them.
Yeah, because
and it's free.
I mean, what it's free, and what we're trying to portray with our miniatures is to recreate nature itself. So why not use the materials that's already there? Mm-hmm. Some of the other example that Isabel is bringing up is twigs from dead weeds and bushes. Dave, I believe you have some tiny baby leaves that was bought from Secret Weapon.
Secret Weapon does supply several tiny leaves. I forget what plant these are from.
But those are natural leaves, right?
These are actual leaves. They're very, very small. They can be just placed with tweezers onto a base if you just want fallen leaves, or you can naturally, sprinkle them as if you're doing spices while cooking, or you can, roll them up in your hands and make just kind of leaf litter, just pieces of interesting stuff to be thrown about. It does have a nice little effect. They don't really look like leaves, but if you're going for fantasy or sci-fi, I mean, nothing has to look like this world exactly anyway. So
yeah, exactly.
Actually, Dave, you kind of mentioned something that actually brings me to a question. Mm-hmm. You mentioned like sprinkling on like spices. One thing I have in the kitchen that I'm sure most of us have that looks just like a little baby leaves is oregano. How feasible is it to use like kitchen herbs and bases?
That's actually a great idea, Jed. I think that oregano or rosemary, or you can really base with anything. I mean, you're creating a piece and you want it to look the way you want it. Anything that's interesting, little twigs. There's some, like Italian chicken, mix or something like that. It has all sorts of different little pieces in it, and I mean, you can just go crazy with it.
Your gonna smell like rosemary. The judges might like that.
Gets extra points for smell. I think you can. You're kind of telling a lie, if that makes sense, or you're fabricating uh, you're just trying to trick somebody into thinking that this is reality with what you can find. I'd say, use anything you can to kind of trick the audience into, yeah.
That brings up a good topic that we're going to keep all the way till the end. Basically, the sentence of the point of use anything that you can. Once we go along all the other materials, you find out that, yeah, we actually really do use anything that we can find. Let's get on to the next one. So we've talked about natural basing materials that we can actually find just going outside. Your house. As soon as you open the door, you look down, there's dirt, there's sand. And then Jed brought up a topic of store-bought natural stuff, which is like oregano, herbs, spices. And now we go into store-bought natural stuff, like, for example, Les's most favorite material, cork. I believe cork has been overused. There's an inside joke with most of us in the Google Hangout with Les where, he loves cork. Because cork is, if you would say that putting sand on your base is the first level of getting introduced to basing, cork is number 2. What do you think, first off, why are people hating cork? And second, why are people loving cork at the same time?
I think cork has a bad rap at least in our community, if not the internet community. Just because it's kind of like, I don't want to say an easy mode, but it's kind of like basing for dummies. I mean, it's a way to get great looking bases if you know how to do it right quickly. I mean, it's just,
you should make that book.
The word cheating comes to mind. I've seen some people say that, but I mean, really, airbrushing is cheating. All this other stuff is cheating. I think anything that's new and it's not a throwback to the old 1990s, sand and then goblin green basing.
Yes,
I think is
goblin green
is too new, or I don't know. The other problem with cork is that if it's not masked correctly or if it's not done correctly, you're just going to look at it and go, "Well, that's cork." That's cork stacked on top of cork.
At least to the trained eye.
Right. I mean, if somebody hasn't seen it before or hasn't seen cork used extensively, they're going to go, "Oh my God, that looks like rock," and it's all crumpled and it's great. But I mean, even with this base I showed earlier, it's just cork stacked on cork, dry brushed, and then some grass and stuff put on it. Wasn't trying to hide anything. This is a couple bases I did for a commission, and it fast, very fast.
Yeah.
And,
Isabel is bringing up basically the point that we're trying to get is people use it in a very lazy way. That's when it's the problem.
Right.
Because when you're stacking cork together, you can see the gap in between. I actually have something here that I don't know if you guys can see it. This is definitely not for a competition piece where you can see the gap in between the layers of cork. But if you use it effectively using other materials to cover those gaps, it can definitely make something looks good. I've seen Chung and Les actually uses the actual wine cork where it fits perfectly on a 30mm Malifaux bases or War Machine bases, and that entire thing is a lot smoother and it's thicker than
stick pliers and kind of rip it up.
Yep, instead of stacking cork. Max also is bringing up a topic or a comment. It's, again, going back to the same thing. The problem with cork is only when it still looks like cork and then you're done with it.
Yep.
That's when the problem is. Jed, I don't know how you haven't assembled really on anything, especially on the basing part. What do you think of using cork in general?
Like for me, I've heard all the horror stories from the community about cork, and some of my big concerns are, I mean, I've seen your cork bases, and no offense,
Yeah.
I've seen enough to where I know that's cork. What is the best way to hide that corky look to it?
Um, I think once you go past using cork by itself and start incorporating in other basing materials like sand, flock, uh, even putty and water effects and that sort of stuff, I think once you're able to kind of cover that up and use cork as a building material instead of the actual just base it by itself, if you think of like sheets of cork as, like Legos almost, you need volume. You have, cork on top of cork, and then more cork and more cork, and you build up the height that you want or the actual shape. Then you can go in with a sculpting tool and sand and glue and all that sort of stuff and kind of create something new with the cork kind of filling up that volume.
I'm so good.
So what I usually do, it still looks like cork, but not like bare cork, is I usually just take, if I want something simple, I just stack cork on top of cork, like I said, and then I throw a sand mixture on top, just cover the whole thing with glue and just kind of stick it around, roll it around in sand so it has a texture.
Mm-hmm.
You can still tell that's cork, right? But it does have kind of a sand gravel kind of look to it as well. And then you can hide it with props and static grass and all sorts of stuff.
Like small sponge for bushes or flock. Yeah.
Just getting, tricky, creative.
Isabel keeps making good point over and over since
Why isn't
last
she on the
episode.
show?
I know. Cork is a tool, and like any tool, it is great if used well. Yes, exactly.
Moderation.
It is a tool. Yeah, in moderation. But for me, covering up layers of cork, I usually use sand. Sometimes, if I'm in double lazy mode, I use snow to cover it up. And we're going to talk about homemade stuff later on.
Yeah, actually, someone else in the chat made a good comment, I think. Richter Scale Studios says that when they were competing at KuppelaCon in San Francisco, the judges actually docked entries if the cork looked too much like it was actually cork.
Wow, that's good part on the judges. That means they're trying to bring the standard on the competition a little bit higher.
Right.
Because mostly in local competitions, I'm a little bit more relaxed and I don't really care much of what kind of display that I put it on, and I concentrate a lot more on the actual miniature itself. So yeah, thanks Richter Scale Studio for bringing that up. Again, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, please go over to mysticspaintingantics.blogspot.com, which is MYST1X paintingantics.blogspot.com. And click on the live show tab, because that is where we're actually listening to the chat. We don't really pay attention to the YouTube chat since it lags anyway. And let's get on with, anyone else have anything to say about cork and why they love it, why they hate it on the audience?
I
forgot there's a lag, right?
Yeah, Tiehead Prop actually has a question. The mix between, is it a good mix between cork, sand, and plaster? Is that a key to making it look good, or is there something else?
If you're trying to create a certain thing, yeah, I mean a certain look, yes, that's a good mix. Basically, what I usually do is I put a mental note. It's kind of like my own cheat sheet when you're painting as well. You gotta know what ratio that you want to put for your paint to mix certain colors. Mm-hmm. For basing itself, I know for a fact that if I mix sand with cork, with white glue, and with snow, it's gonna look good. At least to higher than tabletop standard. So I think you have to experience it yourself, keep experimenting, because again, it's an art form by itself where you have to kind of try it out, and then suddenly you make this amazing base. And most of the time when you do come up to that kind of formula, there's a period where, you know, a good 3 months, you're probably gonna base all your models kind of like that. And then you start looking at other people's bases on like Cool Mini or Not Gallery, for example, or in Google Hangouts, when people have a good idea on what to do with their bases, and you start not copying, but taking it with a grain of salt. And then there's going to be another period where you stick with that kind of basis. So it's a good idea to try around, or maybe even ask people, or look at galleries to actually not learn, but get inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, inspiration. Isabel said that her internet doesn't usually have the upload rate to handle webcam stuff.
Always the excuses. No camera, slow internet. Someday, when America has all, like, not even DSL anymore. What is it? The fiber optic? Yes, someday. But just speaking of Isabel, she has a really good blog, and I forgot what the address is. She's known as Mistress of Mini on her blog, so people usually call her Mom, M-O-M. But anyway, let's get on with our next materials. Now, we've gone through the natural, we've gone through the store-bought natural. Now, what about the store-bought used stuff? Like, for example, Coffee as Dirt. Lazy Pug actually has a video on this. What kind of other store-bought stuff that store-bought that's used for something else and you ended up using it? Some of the examples that I can think of is the coffee grind and also the coffee stirrers. I know Courage and Honor there uses coffee stirrers a lot for his terrain. What do you think of this, Dave? There's a lot of companies out there that can provide a lot of scenic materials that can be used in miniatures.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's flock or miniature, there we go, pylons and I-beams and pipes and that sort of stuff. Plastic rod is always great. You can find that just about in any hobby shop, especially those that deal with miniature railroads. In fact, miniature railroad, or just railroad shops, I forget what to call them, have a great wealth of supplies for miniatures. Ballast, flock, foliage, a lot of stuff. They have this industrial-looking plastic rod.
Yes. There's one company
I-beams.
that's actually 10 minutes away from me. It's called Plastruck.
Plastruck, yeah.
Yeah, and they do make a lot of. Well, they're predominantly for miniature modeling, scale modeling, where for architecture students and scale modelers.
Absolutely. Other companies like Secret Weapon or Back to Basics, or other places you can find online. What's the other one I'm thinking of? Max Mini. Is that it?
Yeah, Max Mini. Yeah, Max Mini is that's right. There's Micro Art Studio.
Micro Art. That's the one I was thinking of.
Okay.
Provide other stuff like brass etch, razor wire. Even GW. I bought this a while ago. Look at that. Bunch of dead grass flock for $8.25. It's probably $10 by now. Snow, chain. You can get really creative with this stuff. And I just have a big tub of it because I think I just collect it. I see something interesting, I'm like, ooh, I'll use that someday, and I throw it in the box. A lot of it never gets used, but that's okay. If I ever do, there it is. Tubs of slate, cheesecloth can be used as tarps and camo netting. Linoleum tile can be broken up to look like pieces of concrete. There's just I don't want to say an infinite amount that you can do, but there's a heck of a ton of stuff out there.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of people. Go ahead, Jed.
I just want to apologize if I sound different now. I'm having technical issues, so I had to switch mics.
That's fine. I can still hear you. But a couple of people actually bringing up a pretty good topic regarding store-bought stuff that's actually a household item, and then you're bringing it as a basing material. Karsten mentioned styrofoam.
Mhm.
Usually for basing, styrofoam is little overkill. It's too big usually, unless you're creating a diorama or creating like some kind of terrain. That is perfect for that. But for basing, I don't recommend using styrofoam because it's just the sheer size of it. Unless you're using foam core boards that has styrofoam in the middle, that's fine because that kind of acts like cork. And then Max Payne actually mentioning something about sawdust, which is good for flocking, because some of flocks are basically sawdust material. Golden coarse pumice gel from Carnophage, and toothpicks, bamboo chopsticks are awesome, according to Isabel, and she brings chopsticks from sushi bars whenever she eats sushi. Whenever I go to a coffee shop like Starbucks, I usually grab some coffee stirrers.
Yep. I was going to mention that.
Yeah,
I have some down in the truck I forgot to bring up.
Yeah, so there's a lot of materials that you can get just randomly in like everyday life. And what kind of materials have you encountered, Jed, that hasn't been mentioned?
What do you mean?
Like something that you see as a household item, and then suddenly, you know, your hobby mind clicked, and you're like, wait, I can use that for that.
Well, I haven't really done anything hobby like basing wise like this, but I've made something similar to using chopsticks, and you've seen it, so.
Yeah, well, we saw what Mike did with, or Max Payne did with toothpick. He made bamboo bases, and then he's actually starting to cast it himself because he's gonna have multiples of those. Have you experienced any items that you find in the household, Dave, where stop putting something in the chat. It's like distracting me, Jed. But like something that you actually see like a regular household item, and then you ended up using it as a basic material, Dave.
Lester from Awesome Paint Job actually turned me on to linoleum tile.
Okay, yeah.
It's very cheap. It's a lot like cork, but it's got a very smooth surface.
And it has like strings over it, right?
Not the stuff that I've used.
Okay.
Just your regular, flat, like 75 cent a square foot linoleum tile can be used. I think I have some of it around here somewhere. But in any case, when you break it up, I mean, it looks a lot like cork from the sides, except it has more of like a stone look to it. This is an unfinished base, of course, and it has some really cool cracks that you can break it up, and then you can throw sand and pebbles on top of it and make it look more, instead of how cork looks kind of natural rock, it looks more man-made,
concrete kind of thing.
Yeah, here's a more finished base.
Come on,
focus. There we go. Well, sort of, but anyway, jeez. You get the idea. It's easy to use.
Now, another good material to use is actually, you already bought it. If let's say you bought something from GW, the multi-part kits, the extra bits that you don't have, and the sprues. What do you think of using those, Dave?
There was an old trick in White Dwarf many years ago when it was actually a helpful magazine. Wink. Where if you took your old sprues and you had a meat grinder that you didn't want to use anymore, one of the old manual ones with a handle, you could cut up the sprue, throw it in the meat grinder, and just grind it out, hopefully with a really wide gauge hole so the stuff would actually come out. And you'd have a pile of just chewed up sprue, but when you piled it together on either terrain base or put it on a base, it looked like stone bricks and just rubble. And once you dry brush the heck out of it, it looked amazing.
And the sprue beams itself can look like some kind of I-beam or some kind of beams.
I got a buddy who just cut up sprue and put it on its bases, and it kind of looks like almost like a hydroponic farm. How some of them have a little circular pegs from where the injection process created. So he's got a bunch of Chaos Terminators stepping over what look like almost like a sprinkler system. But
I've actually even seen some people go to the extreme where they bought a $75 model on top of a $20 model, and then the $75 model is like chopped off really crazily, where it serves as a base of the $20 model. Let's say, like an Eldar Farseer shooting down on top of a Helldrake's head that's already half open.
Exactly. There's a very good example from Games Day, I think in 2011, it's 2 years ago, where somebody had their display piece. I think it was a diorama, because it was quite a big piece. It wasn't a monster or anything like that. Where it was actually a Reaver Titan's arm, like the Power Fist, laying in the sand, and a single Tau Kroot had built a shantytown camp using like tarps and everything, and he's just sitting there looking through binoculars in the middle of the desert with this giant, Titan arm kind of circling around him. And it was actually really well done. But yeah, you can definitely use other kits or just spare stuff that you have lying around from gaming. I've destroyed a Rhino for my Titan base and just threw it on there. I mean, it adds to the story. I mean, you're trying to tell a story with miniatures most of the time. Even with your armies, if they're all based consistently, your army is fighting in the the North mountains or something like that.
Yeah, like if you're new to the hobby and you didn't know this, don't throw away your bits. Anything can be reused for anything else.
Oh yes.
Jed, I understand that you've worked with Necron box, and what have you found? Like how much extra bits do you get from that one particular box?
Oh, like with the battle box, you get a lot of extra fruit, like a lot of extra bits, because the Necron Immortals alone you can make into 3 different guys. So you get 3 different sets of weapons you get to keep, 3 different sets of arms and all that as well.
So there's plenty of bits, and then it's really sad that GW is actually closing down a lot of this bit shop on eBay, on the internet, basically, because you could have gotten like 3 different units using one main box, and then you could have bought the body parts that could make those other units, and I guess save money that way. I guess that's what GW doesn't want people to do.
The rumor is they're getting back into the bits market, but
there's a lot of rumors floating around, like where they're closing. They're selling GW as well, but that's a totally different topic.
Different show, different time.
Yeah. A couple of other things that we still have to mention on basing, and like we said, we can talk about sand for a long time.
Yeah.
But a couple of the materials that's been mentioned is snow. For me personally, I understand that there's 3 types of snow, unless some other people have more ideas. But the first one would be the store-bought one, which is the GW one that you showed earlier, Dave.
Yes, it's essentially just microflock. It's a lot like the static grass, but it is white.
Yeah, it's white, minuscule flock.
It kind of works for like a dry snow, like a really fresh, powdery stuff. I would use it as like a finishing product.
There you go.
So it's kind of fibrous, and then you have other companies that make their own flock. Another good option I've heard is baking soda or baking powder.
Baking powder with the PVA glue. That is the mix that I usually use. Yeah, and that actually gives out like a little bit more slush look, foamy kind of thing. But when it dries out, it looks really, really good, and it is one of the cheaper options. And then another one that I've heard of is the Crush Glass. I believe AK Interactive and Secret Weapon actually has them. But you got to make sure that you wear goggles when you do that, because it's actually crushed glass and it's really dangerous.
You don't want to wear some kind of breathing mask in line. You don't want to breathe that in.
Yeah. So, a lot of the materials that we'll be using is a little bit dangerous, so it's always better to be safe than sorry.
Okay, here's something. Speaking of snow, I want to throw out to the audience and you guys. I'm not sure how familiar you are with sites like ThinkGeek and that, but they have something called instant snow. Basically, it's a small tub about yay big, and it's just almost like a white powder substance inside of it. And when you add water to it or add some kind of moisture to it, it actually fluffs up into snow. I don't know if you guys have had any experience with that or anybody in the audience.
Dave?
The instant snow I've seen in commercials. From what I can tell, it looks like the particles, if you want to call them that, are a little on the large side. It almost looks like ground up styrofoam. And it looks like it only really looks like snow if you've got a large quantity of it. Like I've seen pictures where they're holding it as if they just picked up fresh snow, and it looks like snow. Don't get me wrong, but I think for a small miniature base, it may not have the same effect, especially if it dries out and returns to powder. But yeah, like Isabel said in the chat, you can buy seasonal stuff, powdered foam, that sort of stuff. Just like sand, we can talk about snow for a little while too. There's different techniques, and they all work. Some better than others, but everybody finds their path of least resistance, I guess.
Yeah, I grew to like the baking powder with PVA glue snow because it saves me a lot of money. Because I mean, it's not that I don't want to pay for my materials. I think there's a fair price for everything, and I don't think GW is giving out the fair price for it. So I'd rather go somewhere else to buy it if I can find like a good materials already that I can use.
Yeah, one good thing though with like making your own, like with the baking powder and PVA glue, is you always know you're gonna have it. Like, so if you're running short, oh, I can go ahead and go make some more right now without having nowhere to go to the store.
And you can play around with the ratio as well if you want to make it fluffy, you want to make it slush. There's more control to it. But I haven't really used the instant snow myself. But from the pictures that we saw yesterday from the dry run, it looks like you're gonna have some kind of one scaling problem, because you said that it grows big and then it shrinks again a little bit to it. So it's kind of like a guessing game where the snow is going to end up being, and then the other part is the quantity issue, because it's really hard to just get a little bit, and you don't know how many drops of water to do it. But if the audience has any idea on what to do with it, just feel free to put it in the chat or in the comment, whichever you guys prefer.
Here's a good comment from Max Payne.
Uh-huh.
What about that snow, that spray can snow you get at Christmas stuff? Do you guys use that?
The fake snow that you can just,
for frosting Christmas trees? I don't know. I think that'd be a little hard to control.
Maybe on like a larger size, like a Titan, that it's probably working. But on a 28, mil miniature, it's really hard to control that spray, isn't it?
I would think, because it was going to come out like an aerosol can, that would probably be harder to.
Yeah, I mean,
you did a lot of weight. It would be harder on the wall. I would think it would.
Yeah, it's almost like you're priming your model with snow.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't used it on Christmas trees or anything like that, so I don't have any experience. But I mean, I would try it on a surface, of course, just like any other spray can. But if you want, if it is pretty heavy, you could pull off a really good blizzard piece.
Oh yeah.
Somebody going through the snow.
Or when you're taking a picture of it, you spray it and then take a picture.
Yep.
But anyways, there's also the next material that we haven't really talked about, even in the dry run yesterday, is pigments. What do you guys? Not pigments. Sorry, pigments and water effects, and sometimes a combination of both. Dave, have you used?
I've used water effects only a few times. I failed spectacularly because I used it with cork, and I found out very quick that cork is very absorbent when it comes to that stuff. So I put a whole bunch of water effects down in what I thought was going to be like a swampy pool, and then left. And then once I came back, it was totally gone.
And you just have shiny cork.
Yep, and I have shiny cork. So personally, I don't have much experience, but whether you're using water effects to actually make like a waterfall or a pool of some sort, I've seen some very interesting bases where somebody's standing on some sort of catwalk or gantry, and then there's like a I don't know if it's water effects or just cured, colored, clear resin underneath, where they have another model or some piece of damaged machinery underneath that catwalk, and the characters up top. It just adds a lot. Like I said, it adds a story. What happened here? Did he just kill this dude who's floating in this pool, or is he just on a Mortal Kombat stage, or what's going on?
I've actually seen cases where instead of the guy is actually on top and then there's clear resin on the bottom, I've actually seen the model itself being 3/4 in the actual clear resin, and then only the head because it's showing like someone swimming, and the whole. So you painted a really good looking miniature and then you cover it with clear resin where sometimes you don't even know where the bubbles are gonna be at. You can't sometimes you can't control it perfectly, so you have that risk factor. But I think water effect is one of those advanced basing technique that you have to learn, practice over time to actually get it perfectly.
Absolutely, but I mean, you don't have to use it.
Yeah,
if you're very good with it and you have a lot of experience with it, I'm sure you can pull out some amazing stuff with it. But I mean, it doesn't have to be used at all, but any basing material doesn't have to be used. I mean, it's just all preference and what you're trying to pull off with your piece.
I believe Jed is smiling because Max said something on the chat. Well, if you guys didn't know about this whole show, is also started because Mystics actually threw down the gauntlet to Max.
Yeah.
They are competing to see who gets the most crystal brush, if they get any.
Yeah, it's just playful little competition Mike and I have going on. I mean, it all started as a playful joke one day between him and I, and it escalated quickly.
Yeah, let's just hope it's not giving you false information and then botch your entries, right?
It's just I'm not listening to him anyway.
I think you should use pasta sauce for.
For lava.
It's chunky. It'll dry. I swear.
The last
oregano anyway.
The last material that we're going to talk about, if you notice in a lot of the nice miniatures that was shown on Cool Mini or Not, or even on Crystal Brush, are plinths. It's this wooden block. What do you think of actually using plinths, Dave?
I've never used them, but I haven't really entered my stuff in too many competitions. I think, depending on the piece, it can really add something to your overall composition or presentation. It makes things look a bit more professional. I mean, they're not required, but it's nice to, okay, let's say you have, just a single figure on a regular, 54 millimeter base or something. He's standing there in the case, doing his thing, and he's just sitting there. That's how he's presented. If you think of a plinth as, kind of raising up, let me see if I have something here. No. Oh well. You're kind of bringing it. Not only are you bringing it closer to the judge's eye by, him, that much more height to the whole piece of being on a plinth, but it's also depending on if it's painted black or if it's wood that's stained. It can also give it kind of a more professional look. Also, people have used plinths in the past to title their work, I guess. Almost like, in photography, you matte your photos. It's almost like a hard to. I can't put the idea into words.
Well, a plinth is basically, separates show models versus tabletop, the way that I see it. Because basically, you can't use a plinth on a tabletop, obviously, because how big the plinth is. And as you mentioned, I think you mentioned it briefly, where sometimes plinth, you can even add a backdrop to your miniature, which is kind of part of basing as well. Like
Sure.
during Crystal Brush, I believe the zombie Walking Dead entry
Hmm.
won the second, I think second or third best of show. Has some kind of backdrop, right? Using a plinth as well.
Yes, it does. If I remember correctly, but I don't know if that's part of the plinth or the actual base itself, because they may have built that wall on top
Yeah,
of the. Well, I don't know.
on top of the plinth.
Um, Plinths are kind of tricky though, because if it's a competition like Crystal Brush where base doesn't really matter,
Yeah,
base size, you're not limited to a certain size base, like at Games Day, where it must be a 50 millimeter base or it must be a 28 millimeter base to qualify for these different categories. Um, with plinths, you can really get kind of crazy and have more of a diorama going on if you have all that space to work with.
yeah. And speaking of category limitations, I've heard stories about on Games Day where the guy has to use the 40 millimeter base. That was the only limitation to enter in that category, and then he ended up building cork or whatever materials he used to create a cone. So it's on a 40 millimeter
Hmm.
base, and then the diorama is on like this whole entire big piece of cork. So there's a way to actually milk the system. Um, I wouldn't recommend you doing it. It's kind of like, oh, that guy did that. Um, but it is very clever in that sense, obviously. And Isabel actually bringing out more good points here. Plinth is like saying my miniature is so awesome, I'm putting it on a pedestal.
In a way, yes. Um, I mean, if somebody is a sculptor, let's say, sculpting a marble bust of a famous person, if that bust is just sitting on a table, it's like, okay, yeah, it's great, but it's just sitting on the table. But it has a plinth or a stand where it's standing higher. It's raising it up. You can see it from different angles.
Hmm.
I don't
And
know. It
usually
also
towers over other miniatures.
right. Um, I think that yeah, the fact that it's higher and on a pedestal, just like Isabella said, kind of in the back of people's minds says, oh well, this is more important than the other ones. Um, I'm not sure.
All right, I actually have a question about this. With the plinth, is it good to actually like tie it into your model? If you're say you're doing a certain theme, and instead of having just a plain wood block as a plinth, make that plinth like part of the theme itself.
Yeah, definitely. That is a good idea. Go ahead, Dave. Go first.
Um, I've seen a couple of plinths where somebody has you know worked part of the base or the plinth into it. I think that if you can get creative uh, with plinthing, or some people even call it sockets. I'm not really sure what the exact difference is. I think sockets are narrower and they're around the same size as the regular base itself, whereas a plinth kind of gives it more of a surface to stand on. Um, there are definite ways of getting creative.
Just
Let's see if I can screen share real quick. I don't know if people can see this, but it's
oh yeah, yeah, that's pretty
Oh,
cool.
cool.
kind of a plinth back there. This is one of Massive Voodoo's. I forget who did this, but
They got single fantasy on that, right?
I don't know. This wasn't in Crystal Brush or anything. It's just
Oh,
a
it
work in
wasn't okay
progress. It
because
looks like.
there's a model that was like that that won the single
Hmm.
fantasy.
But there you have it's not really a base. It's more of a socket, display socket or plinth that has a lot more going on. So um, it probably has a measurement down at the bottom of how big that base size is. So I guess it could be entered in a certain category if base size was part of the limitations. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, just by waiting here for Dave's answer for 2 minutes, I've already come up with an idea. Like, let's say if you know how to carve wood,
Hmm.
you would carve out the entire plinth and make it look like a crystal cavern inside it. So the plinth is all square like this, and you carve out the center. You put the miniature in the middle, to make it look like it's in a cave.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And Isabel, again, bringing another good topic, that you can use the plinth to actually put a title of your miniature if you're trying to get that that snapshot of what you're trying to convey, putting words on it, and especially if you're good with topography and everything else, you can try to freehand that. Plinth is, I believe, is good for display. Carrying it, if you have like 12 entries, it's going to be hard. Oh, Necrons, yay!
Let's see, this is just a wood block that's been chipped away at, and they have, the basing material still falling down into that chipped area, but it, that kind of works as the plinth as the base.
Yeah. And come up to the actual last basing material. It's not more of a material as more of, you just have to spend money on it. I'm talking about the ready-made resin bases. What do you guys think of this? Like, is this cheating towards like a competitions, or what do you think, Dave?
Ready-made resin bases. I like them just because I have most of my miniatures. 99% of them are gaming pieces. They make it so that you can have a consistent, easy, ready-to-go, very fast display gaming piece, if that makes sense. It's a little bit more interesting sometimes for themes instead of coming up with your own basing material, and it saves a lot of time. But for display pieces, sometimes there's only so many different sculpts out there that they can be easily identified. Back to Basics and Secret Weapon make their own resin bases, and sometimes they're so popular and easily recognizable that people will say, "Oh, well, he's on a Secret Weapon, pile of bones base that's well painted and everything like that, but that's all he did. I mean, he bought a base and put the miniature right on it, and he's done. He didn't do anything, extra." I don't know. It's kind of a gray area.
Would you say that it's let's say competition-wise is on top, and then tabletop is on the bottom level? You would say that the ready-made resin bases are kind of like in the middle of it, like. Sometimes, depending on the situation, you can use those ready-made resin bases as a competition entry, but most of the time it goes for tabletop standard.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you can come up with some really impressive stuff in the way you paint these resin bases. And I mean, you can add to them. You can add other basing material on top of what already exists. It could be like a springboard for your composition. 2 years, last year? Yeah, last year I actually did enter in a piece to Games Day with a resin base, so I'm guilty of it myself. But I mean, it was something that I worked on, and I wasn't planning on entering it. I just ended up doing so, and it was already on the base, and I was like, what the hell, I'll just do it. I can also use it as a gaming piece if I wanted to, but I'm sure that counted against me if they, could recognize it or recognize it for resin. I mean, look at the bottom.
It's shiny.
I don't know. I think for the most part, resin bases are great for a squad or an army where you want to, have consistent themes.
Consistency.
Yeah. Other than that, I don't know.
Sorry. Like my point of view on them, like I said, I don't know mostly anything about this stuff, so I could be completely wrong. But if I would take one of these resin bases like this and go to like Crystal Brush, to me, I could see, even if it was painted nicely, even if it did like completely tie in the model to something really nice, that the judges would look, oh, we know what this is. He didn't make this, or she didn't make this. So to me, that's almost like entering an incomplete piece, if you ask me.
The counterpoint to that is, I mean, you more than likely didn't make the miniature.
Yeah.
If it's used well and the judge is, you know, looking at the composition rather than what materials were used, I don't know. I think in some respects you could get away with that.
Especially if you don't just send it in, flat out exactly how it looks like. If you add some more basic material to it that make it slightly different than, usual. It's like converting your miniature, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Here's my question though: is like these pre-made resin bases, how a lot of them look the same. Wouldn't they be classified and like almost in the same category as just like adding sand? Because it doesn't it adds some dimension to it, but not like it's almost like that middle layer, like you were talking about, like where you have sand and core, like somewhere in between there, because it's pre-made. It's not. You can tell that was pre-made, and you've seen a lot of them before.
I don't know if any of my Chaos Marines are easy to get to, but I'm using resin bases on them, and they're kind of like an industrial plate, sort of like factory floor almost. And what I was trying to do, because I bought like 60 of the bases, and there's only 10 sculpts, so in order to keep them fresh looking, I started adding like bits of chain and wire and piping and barrels and all that sort of stuff to the bases in order to make them unique. After adding pigments and rust and all that sort of stuff, they started to look individual. But yeah, like if you're doing like a single piece or a squad or something, I mean, if you want to save time and money, well, I don't know about money because resin bases can be expensive, but you could use a couple of unique resin bases and then convert them, like Isabel said, adding props to the stage, in other words.
Because at one point those resin bases were actually custom-made bases by someone, and then they get copied over and over.
There's a master somewhere, yeah.
Yeah. And according to Isabel, which I totally agree, it is a painting competition, not a base making competition. So
Correct.
It's how you paint it. So it doesn't matter, because miniature itself, again, Dave brought up a good point. The miniature itself was not made by you, because that's a totally different category. And it's funny how we keep kind of nudging the composition issue, which just brings up that's why I wanted composition as the next episode, and I believe our guest Trent from AWF will be a good guest for this, because he's been painting for a while. He's been I can't even say it. Has been composing his miniatures for a little bit.
All right.
Huh?
I was waiting for you to finish.
No, go ahead.
One basic material that we kind of, at least to me, we kind of missed was like green stuff and some like sculpting.
Yes. Dave, what do you think of that?
I am no sculptor. I will go ahead and say that. But I can appreciate green stuff and sculpting, putty and that sort of stuff being used to create something unique. I mean, it's obviously a tool that is used quite a bit in our hobby, whether on miniatures or basing or sculpting new pieces. I think it's a great tool for converting, sculpting, creating something that hasn't been seen before or isn't out there.
Yeah, because it could be as simple as adding a snake onto a base by using green stuff. And it like I said earlier, that at some point, basing or created, like custom bases are made through like resin, sculpey, green stuff. So somebody has to make it first before they make replicas of it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I brought, because in our hangouts before, Max Payne, he made these really cool cow bases.
Oh yes, I remember those.
He carved each one himself out of Sculpey, each base was a tile thing, but each were individual, and I thought that was a really cool way of doing it.
Yeah. See, that's why Google Hangout is another tool that you can use to actually share, because sharing ideas, it's especially in Google Hangout, eliminates the distance. Like, Dave over there is running from like Tennessee, and then Jed is from like Cowtown, Pennsylvania somewhere. So, having a Google Hangout session that we actually do have it like almost nightly, it's like sitting on a giant table of maximum of 10 people, and everyone is just not only showcasing their stuff, they're doing their own stuff.
Yeah, Richter scale cities is a really cool idea, I think. They say, I make my own slate by layering Sculpey and Super Sculpey in thin layers folded multiple times, then bake. The finished product is easy to size and work with by scoring with a hobby knife and snapping, and the texture is to scale and amazing look on dry brush.
Richter Scale Studio, if you have a sample of some of that work, can you post it on the WGC community or the forum, and then tag either me or David or Jed into this? That would be awesome if we can actually look at that.
Or if you can even throw a link up, I can screen share it real fast.
Oh yeah, if you have a link. But in the meantime, that is actually like we're already like about 20 minutes over, like already predicted that we are going to be late, or not late, but like go on and on. But Dave, do you have any last minute tips for Jed in terms of basing?
Just be creative, man. Visualize something in your head. If it helps, sketch it out on paper. Try to figure out, in simple ways, how you can achieve what you envision, and just get tricky with it. You can use so many different materials, and it's better to blend the materials. Use sand, use flock, use pretty much a little bit or a lot of what we covered in order to bring in a composition together. You can start with the resin bases and use those as a building block and add to those, or you can start from scratch with a blank base and build your way up. Don't let all the potentials get you intimidated. It's just best to kind of just start somewhere and just go and work with it until you're comfortable with it. Sometimes if I have a new project that I'm working on or a commission or something, I'll take all the bases and create one as a one or two in two different themes and kind of figure out which way I want to go, and then I make the bases first and work the miniature into that. Just have fun. That's the main thing. Don't stress yourself out.
In addition to Dave's tips, actually, one of my tips is don't get discouraged after the final looking thing does not look like how you envision it, because I've dealt with so many changes in materials that I use. Like, for example, the Lollipop Girls, what I did originally was I did it on Photoshop. I created, polka dot lollipops and everything else. It looked all fancy in Photoshop, printed it out, took it home, and then kind of stick it on the wall. This is what I wanted to do. I ended up not having the ability, or doesn't have enough practice time to actually create it exactly on how I wanted it to look like. But I ended up, just sticking with the idea, the theme itself. It just doesn't come out as I wanted. So don't get discouraged when whatever you envision is not, is not going to come out exactly how you envision it. Because as we already know, as a sample, the dry run yesterday was like probably 50% of what we talk about today was not in the dry run yesterday. Nothing is ever going as planned. Richter actually have a YouTube series on it, so we're gonna plug him. How can I not subscribe to you already? I thought I already did. I'm sorry about that.
Also, look for inspiration in several different places. When I first started, I used to look at the people who are masters at this sort of thing, and I'd look at their stuff and get discouraged. just because that's the way I looked at it at that time. I was like, oh man, I'll never be able to do that. But over time, now I look at him and I'm like, oh, okay, how did he do that? I think I can probably replicate that if I tried. Also, if you, I don't know how, different landscapes there are in Pennsylvania. When I drove through there, it was pretty flat, but take inspiration from nature as well, like look at photo galleries of, the actual type of thing if you're doing something natural instead of some sort of space alien amethyst planet. I don't think those exist. But if you're, wanting to do like mountains and icicles and snow and all that sort of stuff, look up actual photographs and kind of get inspiration from that.
Yeah.
And then just try to figure out how you can replicate that in miniature.
Yeah, you mentioned the not getting discouraged by the better works, and I think in the community that we are, like the WGC and such, it's easy to get discouraged in this community because we are surrounded by so many good people, and starting out new it can be overwhelming. Like, why isn't my stuff looking like that? And it's hard to remember that they've been doing it for years.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still just starting out, so you have to work up to that.
15mm Rome was not built overnight.
Yeah. You don't get to level 99 in one day.
You can have somebody rush you. You're there and you're like, well, what do I do now? I'm kidding.
That's about it, actually.
But as my final word, it all goes back to basing itself is an art form. It is something that you have to learn, as well as painting miniature is something that you have to learn. Both ties back to back, especially, or you try to find that perfect balance where your basing is complementing to your miniatures. And also in terms of basing materials, always use whatever you can find. Ask around for basing materials, for ideas, and look around for basing materials and ideas, because it's actually everywhere around you that you can use. And the only way that you can tell whether it's successful or not is try it out first. You could use even the toilet paper roll carton for something. It's anything you can use, and then you can justify and then make it look good, that like, hey, I'm using this material that you guys never thought of, and then make it look good. So as far as the whole basing concept goes, Jed, I'm pretty sure using these materials, you would already have things flowing in your brain, like, I'm going to use this, I'm going to use this. So it's a good idea to actually try out everything and then concentrate on certain things after that. But don't stick with just one material, like sand, for example, if you're going for a display competition kind of thing, obviously. But if you're going for just, practice tabletop, I want to try this material first, then go ahead and do that. I would like to thank all the audience today that especially stuck with us for about an hour and a half now.
Especially Isabel for her wonderful commentary throughout the show. Yes,
especially Isabel. Since our show is actually going all the way to the Crystal Brush 2014, so hopefully by then we can actually invite Isabel officially to talk on the show with us. Thank you again for our honorary guest, David Pease, there with Twin Link Paints. Not to be confused with Twin Link, that's already on the WGC community. He does not have a blog or a page that showcases stuff yet, but he's building on it, so look forward for that. I'm pretty sure I will share it with you guys because he's part of the Google Hangout group. That I met him in Adepticon. He's a cool guy. Check out his stuff. He does commission painting too, so if you guys want to get some stuff painted by him, just contact him, or contact me first, and then I'll give you his email unless he's comfortable with giving his email out. Thank you again. Thank you for Clay to create our logo, and I hope you guys actually, enjoyed the show, learned something.
Somebody saw my logo. There we are.
Yes. Look at that. That is. Clay has been really gracious to provide us with the ponies and the other logos.
The ongoing pony theme of the show.
Um,
In case anybody's wondering, at the time I met Clayton, I was painting Bayou Gremlins for Malifaux, so there's the hat. I do IT professionally, so I guess that's the tattoo on my pony's posterior.
computer.
Yeah, and I kind of made a little name for myself, bringing a jar of moonshine to Adepticon for everybody. So there you are.
The jug. Well, next week's episode, as we mentioned it over and over, or not next week, actually, sorry, next episode. We're not a weekly show, remember that. It's going to be on composition with our guest Trent from Anima Warforge.
You got it right.
Yes, AWF. And we'll be talking about composition and what it is basically, because it's not just putting a toy soldier on top of a base. So hope you guys enjoy the show, and this is Mars.
This is Mystics wishing all of the Americans out there a happy 4th of July next week, in case we don't see you before then. And all the Canadians and other people have a good week as well.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Wait, we forgot.
Oh, wait, sorry, Dave. And Dave.
Thanks, everybody. It was fun.
Awkward wave. Oh, wait.